Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the Australian Labor Party's 50th National Conference. Now, usually, these big political conferences are designed from the ground up to be massive, stage-managed showcases of absolute harmony. But what happens when that intense desire for a pristine, unified front crashes head-on into a deep-seated need for raw, unfiltered debate? Well, we're going to break down the intense internal dynamics that just took center stage in Adelaide, where the careful choreography of party discipline met some very real and very public friction.
Okay, let's dive straight into it, because this quote right here is exactly where our story really heats up. If they put me in the freezer, I don't give a shit. Now that is a direct quote from Labor MP Ed Husic. It's a highly unusual, honestly kind of shocking thing to hear from a sitting government MP at a national conference, right? But it instantly establishes the central friction we're exploring today, that intense tug-of-war between a member's genuine desire to openly debate contentious issues and the party machine's absolute demand for strict discipline.
Section 1. A push for debate, the stalled rebellion.
So to really understand this friction, we have to look at the specific policy goal Husic brought to the table. He wanted the 400 elected delegates to openly debate an amendment. What he was looking for was an acknowledgement of a United Nations inquiry, one that determined Israeli authorities had deliberately targeted Palestinian children, resulting in genocide and atrocity crimes in Gaza and war crimes in the West Bank. Obviously, this is a highly sensitive, deeply complex issue, but Husic firmly believed it absolutely required open debate on the floor, right in front of the entire conference.
But as you'll see, Husic's push collapsed, and it collapsed incredibly fast. Weeks prior to the vote, he actually managed to secure crucial backing from the Maritime Union of Australia. He was building real momentum. But then, literally on the morning of the vote, that left faction union abruptly pulled its support. Fast forward to the final hours of the conference, and Husic's resolution couldn't even find a single seconder. And without a seconder, well, a motion simply dies. The massive floor fight he was pushing for just evaporated before it could even get off the ground.
Which brings us to Husic's reaction. He said, "I have been surprised at the extraordinary amount of energy that has been applied to stop this as opposed to talking about this." This quote really highlights a massive mobilization by factional power brokers happening behind the scenes. Basically, according to Husic, instead of facilitating a difficult but necessary conversation, the party apparatus spent an incredible amount of political capital to just completely shut the whole thing down before it ever reached the microphones.
Section 2. The cost of dissent, fear and monoculture.
A really central part of Husic's critique here is this concept of a monoculture. We're talking about a strict conformity of thought and messaging, which naturally results in a real reluctance to openly disagree. Husic essentially accused the party of cultivating exactly this kind of environment. He warned against the danger of a political machine that is just, in his words, jamming the lines of the day in people's ears, without actually bringing them along for the conversation. So you might be wondering, where exactly does this intense fear of debate even come from? Well, Husic points directly to the historical roots of the party's current mindset. He claims the party is essentially still traumatized by the deeply divisive Rudd-Gillard era. Because of those infamous past leadership battles and massive public fractures, Husic argues that the modern Labor Party views almost any open debate as a dangerous schism, like a divide that could literally topple the government. They've just become completely allergic to public disunity.
And that leaves us with this powerful rhetorical question that Husic posed. Do voters sign up for the status quo or a party of change? While waving his ALP membership card around, he argued that people join parties to actually enact change, and change inevitably requires difficult conversations. He even threw out a warning, saying that if the major parties refuse to stand up for what voters think is right, those voters might just look elsewhere, maybe flocking to minor parties like One Nation who simply aren't afraid to disrupt the status quo.
Section 3. Empathy over outrage, a show of unity.
Now, through a special procedural motion proposed by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Deputy Richard Marles, two specific MPs were brought onto the stage together. We have Josh Burns, who is Jewish, and Bassem Abdu, the son of Palestinian refugees. This was clearly a highly visible, carefully stage-managed moment of unity. The goal was to show that despite the deep, very real community pain regarding the Middle East, the party could still find a way to stand together and project mutual respect. Josh Burns delivered a really passionate speech, and he captured the essence of the leadership's whole strategy with this line: "We stand here to demonstrate what is possible when people choose to work together, choose empathy over outrage." He openly acknowledged that the finalized platform didn't represent everything either of them might have wanted to say, but he heavily emphasized the grueling hours of conversation and difficult compromise it took for them to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder on that stage. And then,
immediately following Burns, Massam Abdu took the stage. His message focused heavily on the idea that human dignity is universal. He spoke really movingly about the daily realities of occupation, describing how it reaches into homes, schools, and workplaces. But crucially keeping in the spirit of that unified front, Abdo publicly thanked his colleague Josh Burns for acting in good faith throughout what he fully admitted was a very uneasy process.
Section 4. The final policy platform. What was actually adopted?
So the conference ultimately boiled down to two competing visions. On one side, you had the raw, confrontational debate that Husic wanted, specifically looking to acknowledge UN claims of genocide and atrocity crimes. On the other side, you had the reality of the adopted platform, where the party machine opted for a carefully synthesized compromise. They deliberately sidestepped the most explosive terminology in favor of established diplomatic positions, focusing instead on opposing annexation, backing a two-state solution, and broadly condemning violence.
So what exactly made it into this finalized platform that's going to guide the Albanese government for the next 3 years? Well, it formally opposes the annexation of Palestinian territory and calls for an end to illegal settlement activity. It urges further action and sanctions as necessary. It also explicitly condemns recent Knesset legislation targeting Palestinians while steadfastly backing a two-state solution. And finally, it unreservedly condemns terrorism and violent extremism, specifically calling out Hamas. However, as we know, achieving internal unity definitely doesn't guarantee external approval. Following this, the Israeli embassy released a very strong statement criticizing the platform. They argue that the adopted language actually weakened Labor's position on Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, submitting that elements of the platform risk placing the responsibility for the conflict disproportionately on one single party. I think this perfectly highlights the intense, real-world political friction that surrounds every single word placed into a national policy document.
Section 5. Conclusion. Navigating the divide.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. Is party unity ultimately more valuable than open debate? The mechanics of political parties absolutely require a unified front if they want to win elections, yet democratic representation relies on the rigorous, sometimes messy debate of difficult ideas. At this 50th National Conference, the Labour Party made its choice, prioritizing a unified platform over a potential public fracture. But, just as Ed Husic warned, the long-term